Hey, we're live. What's going on, guys? Oh, there I got much lighter. That's much better. It is Wednesday night? Yeah, Wednesday night. And all is well. Today I put up a video on the Cleveland and the CLEVOR. First one was a 383 Cleveland stroker, and the other one was a 427 CLEVOR. So Cleveland heads on a Windsor short block. And all that worked well. They were originally done to just we wanted to try the aluminum CHI 3V heads, which worked very well. And as it turned out, especially on the 383, they were way more cylinder head than we need to put on that. But we had them, and we had a Cleveland stroker, so we decided, hey, what the heck? Let's just put these on here. And as I mentioned in the video, in reality, we could have made that power. Certainly, we got to come close to that power with stock heads, but we certainly could have made that power with just ported stock iron head. So, a lot of times people will comment, well, there's no reason to spend that additional money. We didn't. We just put them on there because I wanted to see what would happen. And when we ran the stock heads, the power output was down to the I want to say it was like 478 or 480 or something like that. So it did pick up quite a bit of power just putting the heads on. But as I mentioned in the video, the power gain came from two things. It was a cylinder head and an intake manifold change, because all I had with the stock heads was the stock style 4-bell manifold. So I didn't have anything to compare that to. But there's really no comparison between a stock head and a CHI 3V head. The 3V head is going to make a lot more power. And if you've watched any of the stuff that Kazi did with all the Engine Master stuff and other competitors as well, that's a really good aftermarket head. And, even if you just go by the flow numbers, it supports a lot of power. But when you combine that with the power numbers that they produce in Engine Masters, which is an average power production, which is what we all want, they work very well too. So they don't just make a good peak number, they make a good average number, because as I showed in the video, the port volume and the size is considerably smaller than a 4V. And that works to its advantage, because anytime you have more flow and a smaller port volume, good things are going to happen. They know that. They put a lot of testing and development time into those heads, and they've already been proven time and time again to work. These particular examples are probably not the best for showing that they work. They do work, but we could have made a lot more power with them. But coulda, woulda, shoulda. That's all part of. That's why I put these videos up. This testing, all of this stuff. This is what happened when we ran it. So the dyno tells us, how well we did or how well we didn't do it. And there's some obvious things, like with the 383 especially. That's not a great cam. That was an off-the-shelf cam that we put in there. We certainly could have done, we could have done better with that combination. And I think also on the 427, I think I would have chosen a different camshaft for it. We didn't spec a cam out for this combination. That actually happened to be what was in there from a Windsor combination. So it wasn't, again, none of these tests, when we do these tests, none of them are dedicated builds. Like a lot of guys, you'll get guys that are drag race guys, and they're doing dedicated drag race builds. Oh, my motor made a lot more power than that. Well, it should, because you've made a motor that's dedicated to doing something specific, and you put a lot of time and effort into it. I didn't. we threw those heads on a motor that we already had because we could, other than the we had a piston that would accept a bunch of different kinds of cylinder heads. It was actually kind of a crazy looking piston, because it had valve release for regular inline Windsor heads. It had a valve release for a twisted wedge head. It had valve release for a canted valve head. So it was kind of a flat top piston, but it had all kinds of weird like angles in it. So it was kind of a weird deal. Not optimized by any means for all of them, but able to put all of them on there. So it was kind of a fun deal. But it had enough camshaft that it made enough power, and then had good head flow and stuff, and it had enough displacement that we could rev it out and make good power. So that was a fun deal. I like the Cleveland stuff, and when guys argue back and forth about the Windsor having a different crank journal diameter, and it has too much bearing speed and all of these things, it's interesting to hear the guys go back and forth about which one's better. And for me, I don't care. I like them both. The Cleveland stuff is cool. I like the Cleveland more because it's an other guy's thing. At least here in the States it is, because guys don't do a lot of Cleveland stuff. I like the fact that now that there are a number of different 351 Cleveland aftermarket aluminum heads available, so at least guys can pick from that. Now the factory head was already really good, and so guys could make good power. But I like the fact that now that they have more than that to choose from, and really any kind of performance head, it should have an aluminum head. I mean, any kind of performance build should have an aluminum head. We shouldn't be putting iron heads on anything. And I don't mean to upset all the iron head guys, but an aluminum headed motor is definitely the way to go. I remember running the 5-liter stuff back in the day, and there was just basically no aluminum heads available. And it was nice when they finally became available. And then they became available, you know, by the dozens, basically, which was, you know, there's the only thing better than having an aluminum head is having 15 or 20 or 30 to choose from. Sometimes it gets problematic, but it is good to have a choice, which is why I did all those head tests on the Windsor stuff. Maybe we need to look at that for the Cleveland stuff. Although, you know, again, if you're trying to make power, there's lots of good head choices. Almost all of those will make good power. So just decide how much you want to make, and then what head will feed that kind of power need, and, you know, kind of away you go. Works out good. Yes, I did start a little early because I always run late, so I figured why not start a little early too. Julius is here, so you got to be happy we're talking about Cleveland. So Danny wants to know if we're going to ever do any testing with a Ford FE. I would like to. I've said that time and time again. I would like to do the Racer D. The 208 head didn't outflow the 218 because we tested both of those back in the day, and ours was a ported 218 head. Okay, Tim, yeah, send me. I think I have some trick flow intake manifolds if you want an upper lower stuff. Nope, no LS heads on a small block Ford. John's in the house, Racer D. The Boss 302 actually is a different head than the Cleveland head is. It has different water passages, so that's why it worked with the Windsor-based 302, because technically the Boss 302 is not a Cleveland, it's actually a CLEVOR, because it's more of a Windsor-based bottom end with a Cleveland head on it, and it has water passage accordingly. The intake manifold's all different, but you know that they're developing those heads for future generations of motors, which they eventually put in the Cleveland stuff. An anti-pump up dyno test? You mean a anti-pump up lifter test? Is that what you're talking about? So do you want short travel lifters? Yeah, nobody wants to lift iron heads anymore, especially big block iron heads. A Cleveland head does kind of resemble a big block head, a big block Chevy head. The Jeremy, the AFR 195s would be good on and you know, kudos for the 83 Caprice RS. Those are cool. Yeah, you'll see a lot more Clevelands than you will Boss 302s. Dave, have you tried the aluminum 3VCHI heads? Take a look at the video I just posted. We ran a set on a 383 Stroker Cleveland and on a 427 Stroker CLEVOR. So yeah, we ran those heads on 2 different test motors. Shadow Ops, the 1990s LT1, good motors. The stock Cleveland iron heads are better for turbo or blower. Are you asking which one they're better for? They work for both. And the Cleveland heads also can use big block Chevy rockers too, Tim. When you want to put a Cleveland head on a Windsor block, Ford guys think it's sacrilegious. They didn't back in the day, because back in the day, the only other choice was a 69 351 Windsor head. And even if you ported the heck out of that, it's never going to flow what a stock 351 Cleveland head flows. So put a Cleveland head on a Windsor was a good way to get power back in the day. Joe wants to know how to figure out the correct cam and spring package for a high RPM engine. What size is the motor and how high you want to run and how much power do you want to make? All of those things, what heads are going to use, what intake are you use, all of those things go into figuring out what the cam timing is going to be. GBS Garage, I have a 71 Torino, nice, with the H code Cleveland. Had to use a performer intake because of the shaker hood. Yeah, because it's a hood clearance issue. So it's a total mismatch, but it's a smoke and street combo. Now I ran in some of the testing for the 351 Cleveland, I ran the performer RPM air gap, and it's designed to fit the Edelbrock Cleveland heads, which are a smaller port like this 3V. But we ran those on the big 4V heads, and the intake swap definitely picked up a lot of power compared to the stock 4-barrel intake manifold. So it worked well, even though there was a port mismatch. Now it was going in the right direction because the intake was smaller than the head is. It probably would be worse going the other way, but I've done that on a big black Chevy too, where we've run an oval port head or an oval port or a rec port intake on an oval port head, and that works also. The 400M is a tall deck Cleveland, essentially. It is a much taller deck height than the standard 351 Cleveland. It's kind of I look at it as an intermediate motor between a 351 Cleveland and a 460 big block. So the 400M is a midland or medium size. That's how I look at it. But it uses a Cleveland head and valve train, but it uses a 2V head, which is not great. And those things were never power producers. They were mostly designed for torque. A Rhodes lifter technically is a bleed down lifter because they bleed down at idle at lower oil pressures to take some of the grumpiness out of the camshaft, so it idles better. So that would kind of be a different thing. .302 Cleveland is a 9.2 deck, 6-inch rod, 3-inch stroke, but 2.75 mains and 2.3 rod bearings like a 351 Cleveland. So that's only a motor that they had in Australia, right? We never had that here. The aluminum heads with less flow are better for NA. That is the reason the iron heads are better for turbo or blower. No, the iron heads are not better for a blower. The head that makes more power through the smallest port is going to be the best head, and it's going to be the best head for boost also, whether it's a turbo or a blower. An 8.1 with 300,000 miles, is it still working? And if you do towing heavy stuff, a diesel is not a bad way to go. I have never run an Australian 2V closed chamber head. I have seen them, but I've never tested them back to back against anything else. Jeremy, I did see that. I didn't realize that the way that you were limiting it, that you were able to make the same power at a lower boost level. My comment was that you can run more boost and make more power with E85 than you can with 91. So you were talking, it was just a different thing. 1970 big tower pinna with a 302, nice. Will Cleveland heads be too big for a 358 Windsor Nitro setup, a little street slipper? No, it will make good power. Take a look at the testing that I did on the Boss 351 and even the Boss 302 if you want to talk about, if you're concerned about torque production. Take a look at how well the Boss 302 did with those big ports. The 351 did even better, so you'll make good power with those. ICT car guy Richard, some cam pickers have a form to fill out with pertinent information to suggest a cam. I think the customary fee is $30 to $40. A legend like you can make killing. I don't know that that's I would rather have you guys just do the super chats, and then we're going to get into the Patreon stuff, and all of that's fine. You guys support me, and I'm here really to help you guys. And if I can suggest a cam, and I'm not going to suggest a cam based on valve events and all of that. I'm just going to tell you, look, when we ran this motor that's like yours, we put this cam in it and it did this. So I can give you a dyno sheet to show you what it did. All of these people that are picking camshafts based on valve events and telling you what they think is going to happen, that's not as good information as actually showing you what happened when we ran a camshaft. That's why I like the dyno. That's why every other bit of information that people provide for you, like airflow data, is just suggestive about what will happen when, how much power it will make. Coefficient of discharge is another thing. It's just suggestive on how much power you'll make. All of those things are just indicators on what might happen when you test it. But when you test it, you know what it does. John at CID makes a Cleveland head that bolts to a big block Chevy. Well, it's not a Cleveland head if it bolts to a big block Chevy, because the bore spacing is completely different and the bolt pattern is different. So it's just a big block Chevy head. After 40 years of Mustangs and maybe half a dozen 351 Clevelands, first rule is don't be timid. They like big cams and big carbs and big RPM. So apparently the thought is go big with a Cleveland. Philip has CHI 3V, a ported Speedmaster 351 Cleveland, and a 4C closed chamber. Okay, 4V closed chamber, I'm sure, run on the flow bench. I have the flow numbers. I think I'd have to look them up for the CHI head, and I know I have them for the stock 4V head, a closed chamber head. And I think I have some stuff. The Speedmaster head that I have was ported by the guys at Dr. J, by Bryce over there. But I don't think I have the data before he did the porting. The port stuffers, I think, are a good idea. I'd like to test them on the flow bench and on the dyno. I'm sure guys have done that. I just would like to see and correlate the data to see if there's a change and what that change is. If we see a change in flow, are we just seeing a change in power from something else besides that change in flow? Travis, I've already run a Gen 1 Coyote on boost and nitrous. I'd run all of that. Those videos are up. Andy wanted the video to be a 351 Windsor versus a 351 CLEVOR. So why would you want to do a Windsor versus a CLEVOR? So you just want to see the change in the CLEVOR head? If you're running a 351 Windsor with any kind of factory 351 Windsor head and you make a CLEVOR out of it, it's going to kill the Windsor. If you do a Windsor with some good aftermarket head like a Trick Flow or an Airflow Research or something, and compare it to a stock 351 head, I think that the aftermarket head on the Windsor is going to win. Maybe not, I mean, but I think it will. I guess that would be interesting to try. I still think that an Airflow Research head or a Trick Flow head or something is going to make more power. The problem is you have to put enough camshaft in it to be able to take advantage of what the aftermarket head has to offer. I don't know about Curtis wants to know, and in your opinion, what is the best aluminum Cleveland head on the market for the street? I don't know. I haven't compared them all. I haven't even looked at them in comparison to how big the ports are, how big the valves are. I haven't done any sort of like spreadsheet to find out what the valve size is and the flow rates and the coefficient of discharge. I haven't looked at any of that. The CHI 3V head we know works well because it works. It's been proven in the Engine Masters competition, which I think is a pretty good indicator. And I've run it a bunch of times, and so we know that it works. Humdum, I have not tried a hammerhead Hemi head for Windsor. I've never tried those. I don't know that I've ever had a motor that would benefit from something like that. Hello, Richard. For an engine, you're expecting to make 500 horsepower on a V8 or 250 horsepower on a four-cylinder. What header primaries would you recommend? Actually, if you run a comparison between an 1 5/8 and an 1 3/4 and an 1 7/8 header on like a 500 horsepower 351, let's say, you're not going to see a big difference in the power. All of those will work. I probably would run 1 3/4 on it. Philip, make sure that everything on those Speedmaster castings are up to snuff. That's all I'm going to tell you. Would there be a horsepower difference between a Boss 351 and a 351 Clevor with the same head? I don't know. You might see a difference from the intake manifold, because the intake manifold would have to be different on those two. So you might see a difference there, but otherwise, I don't think you'll see. People like to point out the bearing sizes in the Windsor and stuff. And honestly, I think for that kind of power level, I don't know that you'd see anything there. GBS Garage, thank you. Rex, thank you. Try again. I know this is non-forward, but and so you guys know, and Shadow Ops brings up a good point. He's asking a question that's not forward. Tonight isn't only about forwards. I mean, that's the video that I just posted, but you guys are welcome to ask whatever you want. But did you say you tested the Dorman two-piece truck intake, or was it the LS2 style car intake? I at the time that I tested them, I had tested every Dorman intake that they made. I tested the truck intake, I tested the LS6 intake, tested the LS2 intake, and the truck intake did not work well in my test. I'd like to revisit it because I still have that intake, but it did not work as well. It did not make as much power as the stock one. But I want to revisit that because I don't like doing just one test. I'd like to do more than that and just make sure that it does what I say it does, because it did it one time. I've never seen the Aussie funnel web port stuffers. The only ones I've seen are the sheet metal ones. And you want to make peak power at 53 to 5500 with a small block Chevy, 185 Pro Max heads, a dual plane intake. All of that's right. So you're going to want on a 400, you're going to want a 230, 236 cam probably. Yeah, I guess I need to test the Rhodes lifters. Does Rhodes make hydraulic roller lifters like for an LS application? Racer, the biggest mistake people make when building an engine is not buying a good carburetor. There can be as much as 20 horsepower difference. I know when I did it, and obviously I don't know what you mean by a good carburetor versus a not good carburetor. I don't know if you mean a wrecking yard carburetor or a junky one or a Chinese one or whatever. I know when I tested the Holley XP versus a Holley versus a Brawler, there was very little difference in power between those two. But again, these are at street levels of power, and we weren't at a power level where we would be taxing the flow limit of either one of those carburetors. RC, I don't know how many cubic inches the Aussie 2V head, the iron head, would support in ported configuration because I haven't run one of those. So, Philip, you flowed the Speedmaster head in stock form. Yeah, Tim, I suspected that the AFR stuff would be good. And usually sometimes that AFR can be even better in the mid-lift stuff. They're really good at that. And having a smaller port might help it make more power. So it'd be interesting to see. Andy, I think it would. I think an AFR head on a 351 would be comparable to a 351 Clevor. And I think it might even do a little better. Philip, I made my own guides, if that tells you anything about the Speedmaster heads. Okay, so you know what the deal is. You have to put good valves in it and seats and guides and springs and Julius, do you have any flow numbers for a 302 or a 351 2V closed chamber like an Aussie head? Do you have any idea what those flow? What aftermarket intake should I get for a 302 and a 92 F150? Well, you can always go with I think that they still make a GT40 or Cobra style lower manifold, and then you could put if you could just get the lower manifold, that would be good. That's the cheaper way to go. Then you could put the Explorer upper on it from the wrecking yard, so that would make it cheap. That's one way to go. You could do the GT40 tubular one. Those are really hard to find, and they're getting more and more expensive. There's a lot of good aftermarket ones. I'm going to show a test coming up on the Edelbrock RPM2 and a Holley Systemax, and so there are a lot of good ones for a 302 in that application. Yeah, Jody, that sounds like a good combination, the 417. Yep, gotta love those longer rods, Tim. 351 Cobra Jet Mustang, what's up? The truck, I don't know if the truck or the Dorman truck intake video is up, Shadow Ops. I don't know if I put that up there or not. Aaron, I'm not going to do a comparison between open and closed chamber heads. I don't have both of those anymore. Let's see. Joe, are you looking for help for your Pinot on 302 solid lifter cam closed chamber heads? Will a D3 big block Ford 460 heads? No, a 460 head won't work on a Cleveland. So T Meyer has track bosses for the 302 and the 351 deck height. So if you want to build a CLEVOR. Yeah, Philip, the Speedmaster heads that Bryce did for the 400 flowed really, really well. I mean, you can get a lot of flow from them. I was wondering, let's see, just watched the rod ratio video from a week ago. Was curious if the FRPP 452 block 9.2 deck with 302 mains. The question is displacement being the same at 347. So I'm not sure what you're asking. I think there might be a visible advantage. I'm not sure what you're asking there. Cool. Yeah, Philip, send me over in an email. Send me over the flow numbers. I'd just be curious to see what they are. Yeah, 428 eliminator. Hey, Richard, can you dyno an engine with the reversing stock pistons so we can settle that controversy that popped up? Yeah, I do want to do that. Like I said, I'm all in on having it make power or not make power or whatever the answer is. I want to see what it is. But the way to do that is you have to test it. The Pro Max Windsor heads work really well. We've used those before. How much power in cubic inch can a CHI 3V208 head flow? I don't remember what the stock flow rate was on the 208, but 350, 340, 320. I'm sure over 600. The Explorer 5-liter lower is the same, but he was asking about, if this is about the question, he was asking about the intake. He was asking about a 351 though, I think. Nice. Going to get a Explorer 5-liter, a 5.8 roller. Those are all good, and an EFI 460. Those are all good choices. Phil, the reversing the piston is changing the pin offset on the piston. You know, it's offset to one side, and then they if you put it on the other side, then it's offset to the other side. So it's something Uncle Tony's been doing for years and years and years. Apparently, something that they recommended in the old Mopar catalog and stuff. And so I just asked him if anybody had ever actually dyno tested it. Have you ever tested it back to back, like at the track or on the dyno or somewhere that could show us what it is? Because he's telling people and that it makes power, that it makes the thing go faster. And so I just wanted to quantify it. If it does something, I want to see what it does. Richard, what are the best camshaft companies specifically for Ford Windsors? You don't want to get the best camshaft company. There's lots of good camshafts out there for Windsors. Lots of guys make good cams for them. Is the 400M worth building? Yeah, lots of guys do it. It's different, but it's every engine is worth building. Philip, send them to, if you're talking about the airflow number, send them to my email address. There you go. Let's see. Yeah, there it is. JD Rods, we were just talking about flipping the pistons, and you can do it on any of the stock motors that have pin offset on them. All of the motors don't have that, but the ones that do, you can certainly flip them. Did you have a 427 CLEVOR? They made a Victor Jr. for the CLEVOR application? I don't know if there would be any noticeable advantage of longer rods. The only time, well, I've tested it 3 times all on small block Chevys, and there wasn't any change in power when I tested it. But just like I was talking about with the intake manifold, I want to test it again. This time I think I'm going to test it on a Ford though. I have not, Andy, I've not tested any Flowtech heads or the what are the other low dollar? Skip White. I haven't tested any of those either. Wyoming's in the house. Wyoming wants to know, do you degree cam horsepower compared to, so he wants to know if we've done degree to cam, because a lot of the timing gears have +4, -4, and 0 points. I did a test like that, and I can't, it might have been on a Chevy, because I think that Chevy had a, might have been on the Gladiator motor. I have to go back and look. It was a long time ago. I think we had an external belt drive on it that was adjustable, so it was kind of easy to do. And I'd have to go back and look and see exactly. And a lot of this, there's no universal thing for, a lot of times we talk about advancing the cam, improving the power down low, or retarding the cam, improves the power up top. We see that in VVT applications. Sometimes the cam is right. So if you advance it or retard it, sometimes all you do is lose power. Sometimes you lose power in one spot and then don't gain anything anywhere else. Sometimes you lose power in one spot and then gain power in somewhere else. Sometimes it rocks the curve. It does all kinds of different things, which is why I say what I say. You have to test it on whatever cam you're putting in, on whatever application you're putting it in. Rich, we cannot do idle to 3,000 RPM pulls. You cannot be at idle at wide open throttle. That doesn't make any sense. You can do that kind of stuff on a chassis dyno where you're having the motor idle and the roller is rolling at 700 or 800 RPM or whatever with no throttle angle. And then you can mash the throttle and then you can go to whatever RPM you want. You can do all that on the chassis dyno or out on the street. On the chassis dyno, it will register power. But again, honestly, nobody goes from idle to wide open throttle. If you're racing, you're not there. Even if you're trying to do performance, and obviously I drive all the time. If you're rolling into the throttle to go faster, you're never starting from idle. So there's no reason to have power numbers at 1,000 RPM. Paul, or Daniel, if you flip the pistons, the offset won't throw the crank off balance. The balance should still be the same. Because when they're measuring balance of a piston, they're not measuring the offset of the piston. They're just taking the weight of the rod and the piston and the crank. It does make a change in power or to tongue in the assail block. I don't know what I don't know what that you're saying there, Kenneth. Dorman 615 118 truck versus 615 190 LS2. The LS2 is the Dorman LS2 is the best manifold that they make. That one makes the most power. And I tested the LS6 version and the truck version and compared that one. That LS2 version that Dorman makes for the LS motor is the equivalent of a Trailblazer SS. It just fits under more hoods because it's not as tall as the Trailblazer SS. So it's the short version of that. And it's not a copy of a fast manifold. That's been making rounds on the internet too, but it's not. Banks, hey Richard, will a 224 230 roller make more or less power than a 230 236 flat tap? I don't know. I don't know if one step up in camshaft is enough to change the friction and ramp rate change. It would depend a lot on what the cam is, how much lift it is, what the ramp rate was, if they had the same or different lobe separation angles and stuff. There's a lot going on there. Oh, Julia stepped up with some flow numbers. So a 2V head flows 197 and a 4V head 351 Cleveland 4V head keeps flowing past 500 lift, so it doesn't peak there because I've run a bunch of those. I've flowed 3 of them now. One Boss 302 and then 2 closed chamber 351 heads, and those are all in the 270 range, 273 or 274 if I remember right. And all of them were the Boss 302, and they were very, very close in the flow numbers all the way through the lift range. But the 2V is even less than I thought it would be. I kind of thought that an Australian 2V head would be more than a Pulley head, kind of. I thought it would be more like a Vortec head, but maybe not. You can flip pistons on a 302. Yeah, no, Mike, we wouldn't do it on a. Mike is saying when swapping pistons, the only caveat is it must be a flat top piston, which makes sense. Normally, when Tony's talking about it, he's talking about a 4 eyebrow piston. So when you rotate it, nothing happens. And yeah, you would want to make sure that you have valve relief or, have adequate piston to valve clearance if you're doing that. JD rods. I've already run Pro Max heads on Windsor Pro Max heads, and they work very well. I don't know that I've tested the 180C cast head, but just look at the flow numbers and you can tell. I know that head's going to be a lot better than an E7TE head, because that E7TE head only flows about 165 CFM. They're not good. Humdum. Richard, if we take an EFI Victor Jr. intake and take the carb Victor Jr. intake and make it into an EFI intake, will they both have the same results? I think that they will. I haven't seen any dimension drawings or looked at them side by side to see if they're actually the same intake. If they're the same intake, then they're going to do the same thing. What horsepower with a crank on a stock Q code 72 with 4-bolt mains? It will handle a lot of power. Barracuda. Just take a look at what we do on stock cast crank stuff in LS World or in anywhere else. The crank, I've never broken a crank from power, so as long as the tune is right, it will take a lot. Pulling a motor below peak torque is asking for a broken engine. We do that all the time on the dyno, so we could run it from, I mean, 2,000 is a reasonable number, from 2,000 to 5,000 or 2,000 to 6,000 or whatever. All of that works pretty good. But guys asking to go from idle or that's just ridiculous. Is there any good reason not to turn pistons around? Yeah, there's a good reason not to turn it around if it doesn't do anything. I don't know why you'd go to the trouble of doing that. I don't know why you'd get a motor from the wrecking yard and reverse the pistons if it's not worth any power. That's why I wouldn't do it. A 306 with AFR 185 heads, an E303 and a BBK SSI intake, that will run good. Yeah, K Black, Barracuda. Let's see. Yeah, Barracuda Racer. He's right. You don't need 4-bolt mains, and you don't need a steel crank. I went through all that when I was first starting all this. That every motor that I put together had to have a forged crank in it, and obviously 4-bolt was better. If you were putting a small block Chevy together, they all had to be 4-bolt mains. They don't really. We've run, and especially any kind of NA motor anymore. I mean, I don't worry about that. Andy, I think I have flow numbers on a stock Vortec head. I need to look that up, though. Oh, no worries, Julius. What size turbo do we need to put on a 410-inch Windsor over 1,000 horsepower? I would put an S480 or an S485. And I probably would make that a T6 on a 410. Snafu, that combination will work good. Kevin knows what he's doing. The CSU stuff we've always had really good luck with. That 7875 will be good. It should work good on a 351. I'm thinking that the NASCAR guys or the Pro Stock guys use cast cranks back when they were running Cleveland's. It would be cool to see you build a new Dart Kazi Boss 302 with a roller cam. Would AFR 185s be worth it on a 306? It's way more head than you need, but anytime you have an AFR head, you're going to get good power from it. I'm going to build a poor man's Boss 302, roller cam, Explorer short block, wanting to do an aluminum head. There's lots of good aluminum heads, Richard. The Trick Flow stuff works really good. Like the 11R stuff works really good. All the Airflow Research stuff. Dart has good stuff. Brodix has good stuff. You can't go wrong with any of the new aluminum heads. Julius, 273 CFM at 600 lift. Wow. And still 197 for the 2V. Okay. AFR 185s way back were always the go-to ones. I remember guys talking about and specifically Tom Wilson, because he did a bunch of testing for Superford magazine way back in the day on 165s, and then everyone's telling me how great the 165s are. And I tested the 165 versus the 185, and the 185 didn't lose any power to the 165. So I'm like, why would I put the smaller head on? You know, maybe for drivability or something, but I want the 185 head just so that when I make my 302, a 331 or a 347, it's definitely going to work better, or when I put lots of camshaft in it. Have you run many pulls on a BBSS engine? I don't know what that is. Big block, like 360 small block Ford. Are you talking about stroker engines or something? I've run lots of 363 strokers and lots of 347s, if that's what your question is, Smarty. SV 170cc small block Ford heads. If you're talking about a what is that? Not a J, it might be a J302 head. The aluminum GT40 heads, is that what you're talking about? Snafu. You don't have to worry about bearings or crank size. And the stock rod is usually gonna, you have forged pistons. If you have stock rods, the rod is going to be the weak link eventually there. I don't know when that's going to be, but that would be it. I have done testing with Speedmaster 351 in Cleveland stuff. I had, if you take a look at the 400M, that had the Speedmaster heads on it. 65 Musi, what I found with 302C closed chamber head, they stopped making power at 5,500. The head's not going to stop making power at 5,500 RPM. That would be the rest of your combination. That would be the camshaft. You could get that closed chamber head that flows almost 200 CFM, according to Julius. You could get that thing to make peak power at 6,000 without any problem at all, and maybe more than that. It's not going to make a ton of power because of the head flow, but it won't stop making power at 5,500. I know I'm excited about the Atlas motor too. What's the difference between a 351 and a 302 rod? And can you use you can't use a 302 rod and 351. They're dramatically different lengths. Mark's in the house, 4,200 power. The guys that do really good work on the Clevelands and on the big block Fords are the guys from MPG Heads. They did a lot of stuff with the Fords that I ran back in the day, and they did a lot of Engine Master stuff, and they're really pretty sharp on the, especially the factory stuff. They do really good work on the factory stuff, and have built some pretty cool, like they built an 8.2 deck 408-inch, or I guess it was a 410-inch Cleveland-based motor for. I remember when they told me, they said, "Yeah, this is a 410-inch motor." I said, "But yeah, but what motor did it start out as?" They said it started out as a 302. I'm like, "You use an 8.2 deck to make 410 inches?" Yeah, and you know what? It worked awesome. Would flipping a header do anything? We flip headers all the time for turbo stuff, so it obviously still works. REB Auto, I'm putting an eBay T78 on a stock 5 stock 5.0. If you're putting on a stock 5.0, it's not going to make very much power because the stock 5.0 is starting out not making very much power. So at 14 pounds, you may only make 500 or something. SV 170cc heads on the Fox body Cobra motors. Did the Cobra motor have a GT40 head on it? Maybe it did. They either had a GT40 or a GT40P head. So you can go get those from the wrecking yard, Leyland. You can get those from the Explorer has those. And they had both the GT40 and the GT40P, depending on what year Explorer they were. Julius, I know one of the guys, one of the other big YouTube places did, and they do TV, I think too. Maybe Power Auto Media or one of those places did a comparison between a 4V and a 2V, and they said that the 2V made more power. And I want to revisit that just because I don't think that that's accurate. I don't have the intake flange yet, Mark. Yeah, I agree. So, the Super Ford magazine was really good, and I really like Tom too. I haven't seen him in a lot of years. He used to do stuff. He used to do testing at West Tech, but I haven't seen him for a long time. Yeah, actually, I saw the 300 Ford with the LS stuff, and they've done that with Cleveland's as well. So Jenks is saying you can put Aussie 302 Cleveland rods on a 351 Cleveland with a 3.5 stroke. I think when we were talking about not being able to use 302 head or 302 rods, we were talking about all of the Windsor 302 stuff that is here in the States. I don't know anybody that's going to have any Australian 302 rods, but yeah, I guess if it's because they use the same deck height on the one in Australia. I know I should have put turbo and I should have put turbo in the title, and then everybody would have came and talked about it. Have you done or plan on doing any max effort solid flat tappet stuff? No, on a Cleveland, no, that's not in the cards. Anyone know if you need aftermarket cams for a 544 valve, just get GT500, GT40 stock cams, time them right, and set your cam timing right. So is a GT500 cam better than a stock 544V cam? Better than like a Navigator cam or the Cobra R cam? Bill, they're just cashing in on the GT40 name because they still have the rights to that. So they're all of those things got that GT40 designation. But yeah, it all goes back to the car, and the 40 goes back to the height rule that they had for Le Mans. Mason, what is your question that isn't cool? I didn't see it. Yeah, I agree. I don't think that the 2V head, and they were doing it on performance versions too, not even just something mild. They were doing it on performance motor. So I don't see how even a performance street motor that's even if it's sub 500 horsepower. I just don't see how that a 2V head's going to make more power, especially one that flows 200 CFM. I mean, that's like a that's like a Pulley head. Troy, if you're trying to make a whole lot of power, a whole lot of RPM with your stroke or Cleveland, then you could start thinking about a steel crank. But if it's an NA motor, I wouldn't do it. And if it's a reasonable boost blower motor, I wouldn't. I mean, just again, look at 1500 horsepower from the cast cranks on the LS stuff. And I've never broken a crank on a small block Ford, on small block Chevy, none of those. And they were all cast crank stuff. Peters and Aussie Land, I thought you can interchange 302 and 351 Cleveland rods. What's the advantage? I don't know what the advantage was. I know nothing about the 302 Cleveland. I've never looked at them or seen one in person. A TVR Rover 5-liter V8 is a beast of a small block. What was in the TVRs? Really expensive. Uh-oh, my connection's unstable. Yeah, the Cobra R cams were a lot better, Julius, than the stuff that we had here. Titanium valves are a good idea, but if you're running a lot of RPM, though. The TVR is a 289 hypo. So did my guy ever ask his question again? Mason, I thought we answered your question on the SVE heads. You're talking about the GT40 heads that were in the Cobras and the Cobra R's in 93, 94, 95, right? Those are just GT40 heads. TVR had some 289A codes. Oh, so those are way back in the day then. T-Bird, on the dyno, what size fuel injectors do you use for a mild sub 500 horsepower? Do you tune 60-pound injectors? Yeah, we have all kinds of different injectors. We have, 24s, 36s, 50s, 60s, 80s, 1500s, whatever we need to make the power that we're making. But 60s are easy for that. And then 60s would give you enough room to go above that if you want. Just multiply your injector size, T-Bird. Remember, multiply your injector size by 16. That will give you a really good idea how much power those injectors will support on a V8 in naturally aspirated trim. A Sunbeam Tiger with a 260. I raced against a few of those out on the Shelby meets when I was running my 5-liter Mustang out there with those guys. Troy, I haven't seen testing with the port stuffers. I'd like to do that though. So Mason, then what are you asking about the heads, the late model restoration aluminum heads? I don't know what those are. On a 72 351 4V open chamber heads, can I get to 450 horsepower with just a cam swap? Probably not. Head and cam, I have one with a head and cam upgrade on it, and I think that we were getting up near there, but it was a high compression version. It was a closed chamber head, and it also, we put a comp cam in, not a big one, but we did put an intake manifold in it also. I will be doing turbo 460 stuff. Yeah, Troy, I've had people tell me about you have to put port stuffers in there because of the way that the little ski jump thing that they have there. But I've not seen a direct back-to-back test, at least not at West Tech, where that tells me that it does something or it doesn't do anything. Leyland, the reason that take a look at the video that I have up on injector sizing. The reason we multiply it by 16 is because it takes half a pound of fuel per hour to make 1 horsepower. So it takes 2 pounds. So it makes 2 horsepower at 1 pound of fuel. So then if you do the math, that's at a 0.5 brake specific. So if you just take the flow rate of the injector and multiply it by 16, that will tell you how much power that those will support. Now you got to backtrack that. If you're losing fuel pressure, you have to backtrack that. If you're using E85, you have to backtrack that. If you're using boost, because your brake specific is going to change dramatically. But that's where all that math comes from. It's a really easy thing. So if you want to know how much they'll support, multiply it by 16. When can we see a Gen 3 or 4 Coyote on the dyno? I don't have any of those. I've only ever tested a Gen 1. Julius, it shouldn't be too hard to make over 1,000 horsepower with a mod motor, right? I mean, like a 4V motor, when we ran the 03 Cobra stuff, if we took the blower off and put a 01 intake manifold on it and just put cams in it, it made like 425 or something at the flywheel. And then if you just start adding boost, it's not that hard to get to 1,000 horsepower. And that's not, I mean, we did a lot on other 4V stuff too, where you could make, with a good motor, we could make over 500 NA without any problem on a 4.6 with a cammed one and the right intake and stuff. And then once you add boosted, that 1,000 horsepower comes at a pretty low boost level. Stage 1 BTR on a 4.8 with stock lifters. Yeah, we run stock lifters on stuff all the time. Richard, please drop a set of 351 Cleveland 4VM code heads on a Ford on that. I don't have that 427 anymore. That test is probably 10 or 15 years ago. Sean saying, don't forget pulse width versus RPM. Yeah, you have to get the window starts getting very, 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 very small at higher RPM. I don't think it changed very much on the 3V head test. They were 64 cc's. Smoke and choking, head flow 220, 155, 351, 97, 207, 213. That's a mild cam. What kind of horsepower would it be realistic? Is that a stock cylinder head? And what intake do you have on that smoke and choking? That's a 207, 213 is going to be like it's going to be a sub 400 one. It's going to be more like 350 or so probably. Oh yeah, no room for turbos in the engine bay. That's like Corvettes are like that. Rumble Canada can ask a question about 462 valve. Just ask the question. You don't have to ask if you can ask. Just ask it. A twin supercharged 462 valve. What two superchargers are you using on that? Question about valve float. Okay. Richard, if you add hard block or most of cement block on 302 half filled, how much advantage do they give the block? I don't know. I've never filled any of the blocks on the stuff that I've done. Would you add ring gap on a 38 supercharger for a smaller pulley? We never did on just doing pulley changes on them. I don't know what the factory ring gap is. I don't remember checking the factory ring gap on them. I am going to be doing that on the motor that I have when we run the turbo stuff out and we run the boost on. But you asked if we changed the compression on the by putting the 3V heads on. We didn't on the 427. We didn't compare it to anything else, so there's no change in compression. Bradley GT. Smoke and choke and your RPM air gap or your performer RPM would be the best choice of those for that thing that you're doing. Terry, you have a 472 Cadillac and an 86 Regal with a T5 trans. That's an interesting combination. Richard's in the house. Okay, we got 2 more minutes. So if you got questions, get them in. So Rumble Canada, you have 2 Paxton Novi 1000s. I think I have valve float, but I can't tell at around 5,000 RPM. The dyno was up and down at 6,000. There was a really big dip. Dyno with 1 Paxton. Are you sure you're not getting belt slippage? That's kind of what it sounds like. What I would do is if you can run the motor with no boost and see if the valve is floating, and also what springs do you have and what cams do you have? The 383, if you look at the video, it's not a direct comparison between a 383 and a 427. I know it says that on the thing, but we need to get people to watch the video, obviously. But we're not really comparing those two because they're dramatically different. I mean, one of them is 10 to 1 and one of them is 12.5 to 1. And that didn't come from the chamber size change because we didn't do a change on the 427. It had a completely different piston. It had different displacement. It had a bigger camshaft. It had everything going for it. It was just a short block that I had. I didn't run those two and go, hey, which one of these is going to make more power? Because it's not a Cleveland and CLEVOR thing. These are just 2 things that I ran that happen to share the same head. So it's not you seem to be acting like it's some kind of a comparison, but it's not really. There was a comparison on the 383 between the stock head and the CHI head. Now that would be more of a concern on whether or not the combustion chamber changed the compression ratio. But between those 2 heads, they were dramatically different. I mean, they were almost 2 points. Charles, we talked about the pin offset flipping piston thing earlier. I don't know. I want to try it to see what it does. Are the C3 Ford heads still a viable cylinder head for a street Pantera? I don't know that you need to do that. There's so many other aftermarket aluminum heads that you could put on there that will work. Julius, I think I might be able to find some Aussie heads out here if I wanted to actually do that. I have a cast iron 4V intake, I think, still sitting around. I don't think I've thrown it away. I think I still have that. I don't have any of the 4V heads, but Mahovitz might still have a set of the Boss heads. I don't know if he sold those or not. He had a set of Boss 302 heads, but I might be able to come across that stuff. Racer D, a good head should flow 300 CFM at 400 lift. That's a lot. So the engine was completely stock with trickless street burner intake. So it had stock cams and stock springs on it. That a stock motor still doesn't valve float at 5,000 RPM though. The street burner intake is really good, Admiral. .427 CLEVOR, large bore short stroke versus a long stroke. If you're going to rev the motor, and that's an easy thing to check, just check and see if the head flows better on a bigger bore. If the head flows more and you're going to try to use all that head flow, then go with a bigger bore. Traditionally, race motors have bigger bores and shorter strokes so that they can get the airflow out of the head. I want a 331 high compression of pump gas. Okay, you got to tell me more than that. Why do you want to do that, and how much power are you trying to make, and what kind of car are you running it in, and what's the weight of the car, and all that? Because all that's going to affect how well you're able to run a high compression motor on the street on pump gas, as much or more than the dynamic compression does. Admiral, I've tested the 4.6 street burner too. Rumble Canada, I don't think that they will. I don't think you'll get more low speed. You're going to not have low speed on a centrifugal blower anyway, no matter which one of those you pick. Two, I don't know. You might have a little bit better response with two of the Novi 1000s, but man, you're going to have a lot of drive loss. Yeah, Philip, the Speedmaster casting definitely has potential. Philip wants to see me do a wastegate on a centrifugal. Okay, guys, I have to get going. It's time to go. I've actually gone overtime. See, we started early and finished late. That's a sign of a good employee. I'll see you guys. Thanks for showing up. I'm probably on the road tomorrow. Maybe.